And welcome into another edition of the Mainly Hoops podcast. We have another best bets episode coming your way. We're going to discuss this weekend's massive slate once again. As we've said in past podcasts, all Saturdays or every single weekend we're going to have massive slates, and decided to break them down from a betting perspective today. And we're recording this on Thursday night, so we don't officially know where some of the Saturday lines are going to be at. So kind of just stay tuned for that, as we'll be releasing some of those bets later on. But for now, we're going to go off of lines on Bart Torvik. So kind of bear with us there, as they're typically within a point or two at the worst. So, and I'll let everyone know what we're playing these lines to anyway. But as for our progress this season, we're now up 24 units on the year after we've had a great week. I think this is probably our best week of the season so far. We had a nice run at the end of last week, but this week has been really good for us. And yeah, so yeah, definitely join the Discord where you can see all of our plays, and that's completely free as well. So don't feel like you need to pay once you get in there. We just can't release. It's hard for us to release all of our plays within an article or on Twitter. So like if we have like late editions, we'll add those on our Discord. So make sure you don't miss out on those, as there's a good community in there right now that's reaping the benefits of that right now, as we've had a pretty good year so far, and hope to continue it as the season goes on, as we get more and more great games, more and more great slates. We had a lot of player props in the Discord. You can find those. There'll be articles out once in a while on player props, but for the most part, they will be in the Discord, or a few of them will get thrown out on Twitter once in a while. So make sure to not miss out on that. Also, follow us on Action Network, where you can track our progress on the year. You can follow that at Mainly Hoops One, and then follow us on Instagram and Twitter as well, where you can see everything that we post on our website. And on Twitter, you'll be able to see some of our bets. We don't put those on Instagram, but you can see all of our other content on there that's not even related to betting as well. Coming out with some shirts. They're in our hands now, so we're able to sell those. We're selling those at $20 a piece. So make sure you DM the Mainly Hoops Instagram to get a shirt today. And yeah, and we're also going to be adding another Best Bets episode. We typically only do 2 episodes, but we're actually going to do 3 from now on. We're going to do a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday podcast. We're just kind of giving the people what they want, as our viewership has been much better with our betting content. So we're just going to continue to give the people what they want and give you guys an extra episode. Obviously, we love talking about it, and we love bringing you guys content. So definitely stay tuned for that. We're going to try to do podcasts as often as possible. It's looking like it's going to be Monday, Wednesday, Friday. This is obviously going to be our bigger pod, as weekend slates are much bigger. But as for that, let's dive into the slate for the weekend. And we're going to start with a Friday play. It's more of a lean here, and some of it's because of injury news, but I'm going to lean DePaul plus 9.5 at Georgetown. It's kind of ugly to back a DePaul team right now. I mean, they haven't won a conference game in, I think, 2.5 years now. So it's definitely tough to back them at this point. And they're 0-6 in conference right now. They've lost a couple heartbreakers, a couple overtime games recently, one at Seton Hall, and then another one where they competed extremely hard against Marquette and took them to overtime and ended up losing late there. They believe they lost by 2. But against a Georgetown team that the offense isn't great, it doesn't profile as a team that can win by huge margins. I think this is a really good spot for DePaul they're still going to be hungry off of those 2 overtime losses and all of the losses that they've suffered in conference play recently. So yeah, I mean, we definitely like DePaul here. We like the guard play of DePaul. I think they might have the edge, especially with the injury news for Georgetown. We have to monitor the injury news, especially of Jaden Epps, who is probably going to be a true game time decision in this game and may not even play. He had to exit the game against St. John's I believe he played 15 minutes in that game and wasn't able to go the rest. He's been dealing with a little ankle injury for the last 5 or 6 games. So I wouldn't be held out against an inferior team in DePaul, albeit it is a conference game and they're all important. And then we should kind of monitor the injury news of Thomas Sorber, who's easily Georgetown's most impactful player, playing up front. His rim dominance is huge for this team, and a big reason why they've they've jumped up to the middle of the pack here in the Big East as opposed to being at the very bottom last season or slightly above DePaul, obviously. But yeah, Sorber has been massive for them. He left the game with a hyperextended elbow, but he did come back into the game for like the last 45 seconds to a minute. But as a couple days go on, like it gets a bit sore, and like he looked like he was in real pain initially. So we'll see what happens with Sorber. If Sorber doesn't play, this is 100% a play on Georgetown at plus 9.5, and I would play it down to 7.5. I'm not going to say they've been extremely unlucky, but definitely a tad unlucky, I would say, especially in these close game losses. I think they're playing a bit better than their results are saying. They had leads in both of those games. They had a huge lead over Seton Hall, and they ended up blowing that lead. So I like 9.5 here against the Georgetown offense that isn't great. And if Sorber misses this game, which I don't think it's a high probability that he misses, but this is a game that definitely stay tuned and make sure you're following the Twitter and joining in the Discord to see if we're making a late ad, because most of these injury plays are going to happen within an hour of the game, because you'll see if a guy's warming up an hour and a half to an hour before the game tips off. So yeah, that's where I lean. I lean DePaul there regardless if Georgetown is healthy. So play that as you wish. But at the moment, it's not official. Hopefully it is official. Well, I mean, we're not going to prey on injuries here, but if they are hurt, we're definitely playing DePaul. I would play them down to in the 7.5 range. And I think they can win this game outright if Sorber doesn't play. So that will be our first play with DePaul plus 9.5 as a lean. And that'll be our only lean on Friday. It's a smaller slate on Friday. There's some good games, but nothing I really saw value in. Where I do see value, and a lot of it is on Saturday. And it starts with, you could argue this is the biggest game of the day. Alabama +1 at Kentucky is not one of my favorite plays of the day, but definitely a play on a massive game that I would like to discuss. Alabama's coming off of a tough loss to Ole Miss, where, quite frankly, they kind of got dominated in that game. But I'm not super, super worried about their long-term outlook. Obviously, the shooting kind of has its issues, I guess. Like, they don't have as much shooting as a typical Nate Oates team does. Chris Youngblood hasn't really stepped up as that spot-up shooter that they've really needed, and they really needed against Ole Miss. And he hit a couple early, but wasn't able to really to keep it going. His shot looked a bit funky in the second half. It didn't look all that great. They're dealing with some injuries as well. With Darian Reed, especially, he will be big for the wing defense in this game. If he's able to give it a go, Alabama +1 will absolutely be a play in this game. And it's because of the rim dominance of Alabama. Like they're extremely good inside the arc. They're third nationally in 2-point field goal percentage offense. And this is against a Kentucky team that's shown some major cracks on the interior. They're 211th nationally in 2-point field goal percentage defense. And they've, since SEC play has started, they've really struggled. Teams like Georgia dominated them. Florida absolutely dominated them, although they've dominated a lot of teams on the interior. They shot 21 of 27 inside the arc against Kentucky. Mississippi State shot 20 of 31 inside the arc. And that was a game that Kentucky ended up winning because of their elite shot making and elite 3-point shooting. And A&M shot 16 of 29 with, I mean, that's a team that doesn't really shoot it all that well inside the arc. They're missing Wade Taylor right now. They don't have that dynamic guard that they can really trust to score efficiently. So Kentucky, they've shown some major flaws on the interior and on defense in general. And I think Bama can exploit that inside the arc as opposed to shooting a ton of threes. I think Bama can get on the glass a little bit. They can get on the glass against anybody in the country. It'll be tough to do against a Kentucky defense that, stays connected and always has a body on someone to box out. And yeah, their defensive rebound numbers are solid, but Alabama can create some value there as well. Bama on the defensive end, I believe, matches up fairly well with Kentucky. They can limit Kentucky's 3-point attempts. They can limit guys like Robinson and Brea. Robinson had a great game last game, but it was because he got left open a ton. And I don't think he's going to have those same open windows against an Alabama defense that cuts off the 3-point line and cuts off spot up chances. They're Alabama's 13th nationally in 3-point defense. So that just goes to show how great this 3-point defense is, and it's not really luck. They do a great job of just cutting off the 3-point line in general, and they have athletes that can get a hand on shooters. So it's something that is sustainable in my opinion. Kentucky's also solid inside the arc, but I really do trust Bama's rim protection. It's much improved, especially from last year. That was the main problem with this Bama team last year. They didn't have a true center. Now they have Cliff Amori, and they have some other guys to back up Amori at this point with Nelson, who's playing back at his natural position at the 4. Jaron Stevenson sometimes even plays the 3, and he's an elite rim protector for a 3, and he can play all the way up to the 5 position. And they have a ton of depth to go along with that. So I think Bama is the much better defensive team in this game, which definitely gives them a leg up. And I think the offenses are fairly even, although I probably would trust the Kentucky shooting a bit more. I do trust Alabama's rim dominance, and that creates a higher floor in this game. So I do expect a better effort from Bama off the loss. They just didn't really look like they had a plan B against Ole Miss, which is a concern. But in this game, I really do trust the rim dominance, and I do think Kentucky is still a tad overvalued at this point in time. So at the moment, I will play Bama +1. This is a Torvik line, but I wouldn't be surprised if it came out closer to, I don't know, 2.5 to 3. I think the market really likes Kentucky, so I would certainly play that. I'd probably play this down to Alabama at a pick. So that'll be our first play of the day. The next play will be Oregon -1 hosting Purdue. This is an Oregon team that I typically don't really like to back. I think they've been overvalued throughout the course of the year, especially with, I think they've been fairly lucky to start the season, and they've in a lot of games. They were down double digits in multiple games early on in the season. They just recently won 2 road games by 1 possession. They beat Penn State by 1. I believe they beat Ohio State by 2. And both games came down to like the final possession. And so I still think Oregon is a tad overvalued, but I think Purdue, and especially on the defensive side, is extremely overvalued at the moment. Nobody's making threes against them at the moment, and they allow a fairly high amount of unguarded threes, and they've been super fortunate in that regard. And that we all know that's a luck stat. You can't really have great numbers intentionally against an unguarded 3 unless you're leaving a really bad shooter wide open and they're taking them. But I don't think that's what Purdue is doing here. They prefer to load up in the lane because they don't really have that elite rim protection that they typically had with Zach Edey. So they have to defend a bit differently, and it really hasn't worked all that well against top tier competition. But in their last 5 games, they haven't played any team of note, really, maybe besides Nebraska. But the Nebraska offense isn't really anything I'm scared of, and it's definitely their much weaker side of the ball. In their last 5 conference games have all come against bottom half Big Ten competition. And it is making them look way better on the defensive end. And they trailed by 10 against Washington and Minnesota. And Minnesota was competitive for a while in that game. I don't believe they were down 10 at any point, but Purdue was trailing in the second half of that game. Like I said, I don't love Oregon in the long term, but I do think this is a good spot for them. They've had a week off to prepare for this Purdue team. Purdue had to play on Wednesday, so the advantage for rest, the preparation time, definitely goes to Oregon in this spot. And Oregon definitely doesn't want to lose another home game in conference. They've already lost to Illinois and UCLA. That UCLA loss is aging much worse by the day. UCLA was pretty fortunate to win that game. So, yeah, and Oregon has a super balanced roster, and you've seen Shellstad play much better as of late. We expected him to be very good to right away to start the season, and he just wasn't really making shots. You could tell he was getting good shots, but they just weren't falling. So definitely very good to see him playing much better as of late. And I do think on the defensive side of the ball, Oregon does have viable post defenders to guard Kaufman Wren and Nate Biddle and Kwame Evans. So I also think they'll constantly change defenses against Purdue, which I think can confuse them a little bit. They'll play some zones to kind of keep Purdue out of that middle pick and roll game with Braden Smith, because if he gets into a groove, he can really carve you up. So definitely like that element of Dana Altman's coaching style and for this Oregon team in general. And overall, I do think it's a good spot to back Oregon, despite them coming off of 2 road wins. It's just the preparation time, the rest time is huge in this spot. So I will back Oregon -1. I would play this to -2. I don't think it's going to be all that high. I wouldn't think this gets over a possession, but I will back Oregon up to -2. And moving on to the next play will be and probably the biggest buy low, sell high spot of the entire weekend for me. It's Mississippi State hosting Ole Miss. Mississippi State is projected to lay 4.5 per Torvik. Would be a bit surprised if we did get 4.5. But I would play this up to -6 because I do think Mississippi State is still the much better team despite Ole Miss and their success early on in SEC play. They're sitting at 4-0 in the conference. Mississippi State is off back-to-back losses, albeit against pretty solid competition. And yeah, Ole Miss, like I said, they were coming off that win against Alabama in a game where they pretty much won wire to wire. They dominated that game. And the Ole Miss defense is better than I give it credit for, but I think they've been extremely fortunate defending outside the arc. 25% is the best 3-point mark anybody shot against them in conference in their 4 games. And they give up a ton of threes. So I don't really think this is all that sustainable. Chris Beard typically has solid 3-point defenses, but it's not this great. And they don't have a ton of length to defend shots. Like when they can't get out to shooters, I don't really think they have the athletes to recover super well. Like guys like Padula and Jalen Murray aren't like the longest, or they're smaller. They're not your prototypical Chris Beard defender. And that was kind of my issue preseason with this defense was the personnel not being like up to snuff for like to be an elite, like a Texas Tech, like Chris Beard defense. I don't think it's quite there. They're sitting at 11th in KenPom, I believe, right now defensively, and I don't think that's anywhere near where this number should be, or where. I mean, they've earned that right at this point in time. I just don't think that's really indicative of what this defense really is. They've been a bit fortunate from 3. Ole Miss also, they create a ton of their value by turning you over. They're top 10 in the country in defensive turnover rate. But Mississippi State takes care of the ball at an elite level. They're top 15 in the country taking care of the ball. So it'll be a bit of a tug of war there. But I don't anticipate Mississippi State turning the ball over 20 times and leading Ole Miss to a ton of runouts. So, and Mississippi State, they have viable shooters to go over the top of this no middle defense in Josh Hubbard and Claudel Harris and Riley Kugel if he's able to play. He's a bit more volatile than the other two, but I really do trust Josh Hubbard and Harris to punish this defense when they're left open on those skip pass threes. So definitely like that angle there. And I especially expect Claudel Harris to have a big day. Look out for a 3-point prop on Claudel Harris. That's most likely coming and possibly somewhat of a ladder play, something that I like to do when I think a guy has a really, really good matchup, especially shooting threes. You can find some real value on ladder plays there. And on the defensive end, Mississippi State, they can also match the versatility of the Ole Miss front court of Malik Dia and Jamin Brakefield. They have their own duo that's extremely versatile in Cam Matthews and Keyshawn Murphy. So I would basically consider that a wash. I do think the Mississippi State duo is more versatile on the defensive side, and I think that can give them a real edge in this game for an Ole Miss team that will mismatch hunt a little bit, and I don't really know if you can do that against this Mississippi State front line. So definitely, and that's going to be another angle in this game that I like. So the Bulldogs, they do match up well, but I like the spot more than anything in this game. And like I said, I wouldn't be surprised to see a -6, but I'd still lay 6. I'd probably 6 might be the cutoff. 6.5 is probably like my final cutoff on this game because I do respect the Ole Miss defense now, but I do think they're due for regression. And I think a Mississippi State team that likes to shoot the 3 and has multiple shooters that can beat this defense, I think that'll go a long way. So officially, we'll most likely officially be betting this game. Be on the lookout for that tomorrow. But if we get 4.5, it's a play right away. So don't hesitate to play a minus 4.5. And another one of my favorite plays of the day is another SEC game. It'd be Georgia hosting Auburn. Torvik has this line at 10, but this line isn't accounting for Jedi Broom being out. And I believe Jedi Broom's worth at least, I don't know, 4 to 4.5 points. So I wouldn't be surprised if we're seeing a 5.5 or 6 in this game. I would still play 5.5 or 6. So we'll consider this line 6 right now. And if that's what the line is at the opener, I will be playing that. And that's the biggest factor in this game is Jedi Broom isn't playing, although it is being factored in. And Auburn was fine in the first game of the year. A lot of teams do pick up the slack in the first game that a star player is out with an injury. They call it the Ewing theory. Especially at home environment like Auburn, like guys on the bench, like Chaney Johnson really stepped up for Auburn. And I don't really expect him to keep up production of 17 points, 10 rebounds, and 5 blocks, I believe. I don't really expect that to continue. Like that's Jedi Broom like production or Jedi Broom like stat line on the offensive side. So definitely don't expect that to continue, especially against the Georgia front line. It can be considered elite. And obviously Auburn's a great team without Broom, but life is going to be much harder on the road. Like I said, those guys are just going to play up when they're playing at home. In Georgia, they have an elite defense that they can bother any offensive group in the entire country, and I think they can bother this group. They're really good, but I wouldn't consider them world beaters by any means. Like Jedi Broom is what makes this team go for the most part on the offensive side with his rim dominance, and I think Georgia actually has the advantage at the rim, and they have the advantage physicality wise, and that's a huge edge against an Auburn team that's where they always have the advantage, and that's where they like to win games is on the glass and at the rim. And I think Georgia could actually win there, especially being at home, maybe have a friendly whistle. The one glaring weakness for this Georgia team would be the ball security. They're 303rd nationally in turnover rate, but Auburn, they don't really turn you over. They're 203rd nationally in defensive turnover rate. They're more conservative. They like to, stay connected to shooters. They don't like to overhelp in the lane. Like they want to filter you to the rim and, force you into, what's usually the two-headed monster of Broom and Cardwell. Now it's a little bit less daunting with Chaney Johnson. So I do expect guys like Asa Newell, Santos Cyril, RJ Godfrey. I expect those guys to have success in this game. And like I said, like they should get all over the glass in this game. And the fact that their guards aren't going to be all that bothered in this game, unless Bruce Pearl ramps up the pressure for some reason. I don't really anticipate that. But and if the Georgia guards can have a good game, I think they absolutely can win this game outright. But I will be taking the points because the guard play is what scares me off late in this game. They could have a lead and kind of cough it up when Auburn does ramp up their pressure if they're trailing. So I will take the points. I would take this down to Georgia +5. Now, they're coming off a game where they actually really well for a half, and it was I believe it was like a 20-0 run against Tennessee where they really asserted their perimeter defense on Georgia and they gave them a really tough time. But Auburn doesn't have that same quality. They don't have Zakai Ziegler or Jemai Mashak, so definitely not as scared of that defense. So I will take Georgia +5. And the next game we'll go to is another SEC battle. I feel like I have a ton of SEC action. It's the best league in America. It's the easiest league to keep up with. So definitely have more opinions on this league than a lot of other leagues. But it's going to be another buy low, sell high spot. And it's going to be on Arkansas +7.5 per Torvik at Missouri. I don't think we get 7.5, but to be fair, I would play this down to 4.5 as I still think Arkansas is the better team. And it's a fantastic buy low, sell high spot. Missouri riding high off the win at Florida. And Arkansas is 0-4 in league play, and they haven't looked particularly great. But I do I personally think Missouri is a bit fraudulent as they've performed much better than I anticipated they ever would perform. The interior defense is much better than past Dennis Gates teams. They're typically outside the top 200 in 2-point defense. They're in the top 50 this year. So definitely credit to them. Mark Mitchell effect has been real there. Josh Gray has done a really nice job, and they have more bigs that they can rotate into the game. But that is one of my main problems is the Dennis Gates rotation. He plays way too deep of a rotation. He played 12 guys on Tuesday. It just doesn't make a ton of sense to play 12 guys in a conference game. Like you got to let your best lineups run. And if you have I mean, a 5-man lineup that's rolling, you got to keep them in the game. You can't just keep rotating more guys in the game. Like it just creates more chance for you to give up a run. And if a lineup isn't working together, it could all fall apart. And it almost did against Florida. They had a half where they just went nuclear from three, backed by Caleb Grill. And they do have some good shooting on this team, but it just feels like with Gates, like he feels like he has to insert himself on the game, and he's just throwing stuff at the wall and just kind of hoping it sticks. And it's just not a great strategy. He thinks it's a great strategy, but I personally don't, and maybe that's why I'm not coaching college basketball at this point. But I I think a lot of people would agree with my side that you can't play a 12-man rotation in conference play, albeit they do play fast. It still doesn't really matter. And one really weird aspect of this game was he benched his star freshman point guard Anthony Robinson for the last 7 minutes of this game for really no reason. He had four fouls, but there's 5 minutes left in the game. Like fouls do not matter in a close game. But it's the guy he put into the game that made it even more baffling. He put in another freshman, Theo Barrett, who hadn't seen a single minute in the entire game, and they asked him to handle the ball late and handle the pressure of Florida when they were up 5 or 6. It made no sense for him to go into the game. Like, why are you waiting until the final 5 minutes to put this guy into the game in the most pressure packed situation? It's just an example of what Dennis Gates does coaching wise that I quite frankly absolutely hate. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I think it creates more opportunities to give up massive runs if a lineup isn't working. So, and yeah, I believe Missouri showed their true colors in the second half of that game against Florida. Florida pretty much dominated the second half after, like I said, Missouri went nuclear from 3 in the first half, and I just don't think it's indicative of what that team really is. And on the Arkansas side, they're super talented. I think they have the talent edge in this game, which I always think plays up when you're motivated as an underdog. We've seen it happen. Like they're sitting at 0-4 in league play. They've had chances. They've been motivated in spots. They're coming off a loss against LSU. But I do think this is the ultimate buy low spot for this team. The only issue I would have is I'm not sure Coach Cal will have a great game plan for the zone looks that Missouri throws at them. Dennis Gates loves to change his defenses. He plays a little matchup zone. He'll play some man. He'll play a traditional 2-3. He'll play 1-3-1. He'll play a lot of different styles, and that in turn leads to his team forcing a lot of turnovers because it confuses some teams. But the more tape you get on that, the more ready you'll be for it. I just don't know if I completely trust Coach Cal to have a great game plan. They could get their 53rd percentile against zone this season on offense per synergy. So it's not terrible, which is it's above average for the country, but it feels like they get forced into bad shots. Like the game against Baylor early in the year. I just don't think they were ready for the zone because they hadn't seen really any tape of that version of Baylor of their zone. That was the second game of the year. So I don't want to put too much stock into that, but I don't think this offense profiles to be great against the zone. And I think you'd see a lot of zone from Missouri, but I'm not super worried about the matchup. I'm better. I think they're better suited as a dog, and they're super talented. I think they have the better defense in this game, which will play big, and they have the better shot makers. So, and another good part about this game is that both teams love to play in transition, and that favors Arkansas in my eyes. They play, I believe, in the 97th percentile, or they're 97th percentile in transition points per possession, which is obviously elite. And their half court numbers definitely get much worse. And Missouri's a willing running mate in this game. They like to run some of their own. I think that's why Dennis Gates plays his deep rotation. And they aren't like fantastic defending in transition. So definitely like that angle from Arkansas. Hopefully we don't see them too stagnant against the zone. And like I said, this is the ultimate buy low spot on Arkansas, and I'll buy them one more time. So that's the last of my favorite plays for Saturday. Just a few other ones that I wanted to throw out there. None of these are official yet. They'll be more official once we get those out on the Discord or out on Twitter, and once we see real lines, which should come out middle of the day Friday. Hopefully we can get those out to you as soon as possible. But I'm gonna ride the Wake Forest train again. I've backed them in 3 consecutive games. I just think they're extremely undervalued at this point in time. The offense has been much better since the insertion of Tyler Johnson that I've talked about in past Best Bets podcasts. He's helped Hunter Salas and Cam Hildreth get back to their natural positions. They're not point guards by nature. Their games don't profile to play point guard, and those guys getting delegated to their natural positions has been massive for that team. And they're playing a Virginia Tech team that is just they're at the bottom of the league. Their defense has been pretty bad, and they turn the ball over a ton. And Wake Forest can really take advantage in that area. So definitely like Wake Forest. They have it as a pick. I would play this within a possession favorite for Wake Forest any higher than 3. But I think the value on Wake right now is definitely there, even after they've won 5 straight games. And they're going to play North Carolina on Tuesday as well, and I'm probably going to back them again in that game. It's a really good spot for them, despite how well Carolina has been playing in their last 4. So yeah, I like Wake. Would lay it up to 3, sitting at a pick at Torvik, but I don't think we get a pick. I think hopefully we can get within a possession though. And then another SEC battle. I lean towards LSU getting 11.5 at Texas A&M. I just don't think this version of A&M profiles as a good favorite at all, especially if Wade Taylor doesn't play. He's been getting ruled out the day before the games, so yeah, I think it's closer to like 80-20% that he doesn't play in this game. So they just don't have enough shot making. Like with Zurich Phelps, he's been taking a ton of shots. I believe he's taken like close to 70 shots in the last 3 games, and the efficiency hasn't been fantastic. And obviously they can get all over the glass, but their game just doesn't really profile the play as a big favorite with the lack of offensive firepower that they have right now. And it's not the greatest matchup for LSU, as they're not good on the glass at all, and that's really bad news against an A&M team that's number 1 in the country in offensive rebound rate. And LSU turns the ball over a bit. It's more of an anecdotal play here, and just A&M's offense isn't up to snuff at all. And they've shown cracks against they played Alabama and Kentucky in their last 2, and they weren't able to cover as dogs. And that's a team they profile to win as an underdog with their feistiness, with their ability to win the shot volume battle. And I just don't see them hitting enough shots in this game to win by margin against LSU. So I will most likely back LSU. That'll be another play that will kind of wait on for Friday night, Saturday morning to see where the line's officially at. But definitely the side I'm looking to back. And then we'll get off of the SEC for the rest of this episode. We pretty much covered every game at this point, but going to back another dog. It's going to be Seton Hall plus 10.5 at home against St. John's. Mostly a fade of St. John's, actually, is more rather than a play on the Seton Hall Pirates. Says I love backing them as an underdog anyway. Maybe a little bit less now because the defense has faltered a little bit as Sheehan Holloway is trying to tap into more offensive upside of this team, playing different guys, playing Coleman and Chauncey Jenkins almost exclusively now to really maximize what they can do on the offensive end. And it's been working. They stay within inside the number against Butler. So, and yeah, they're still a feisty underdog overall, but it's more of a fate of St. John's offense. The offense has looked pretty pitiful so far this year, or so far in conference play. And they lost Davon Smith last game. He got ruled out fairly early in the day when they played Georgetown. I believe that was on Tuesday. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was out again. Out again. The shoulder injuries are tough to deal with at times, especially if it's his shooting shoulder. It's going to be a bit tough for him to come back or even be effective when he does come back. I will most likely play this even if he does play, as they just don't really have they don't have the offensive firepower. They don't have the breakaway speed to beat this team. And Seton Hall, they're going to be hungry. This is their first like really big game at home, so I think we're going to see probably the best effort we've seen from the Seton Hall Pirates all year long. So that's the area I'll go. I would back them down to plus 9.5 as a home underdog. So and that's the last play of the Saturday slate. As for the Sunday slate, line could be completely different. Not really sure, but I want to back Nebraska at plus 7.5 at Maryland. I think it's a pretty good matchup against a post heavy Maryland team with Derek Queen and Julian Reese. Nebraska completely cuts off the post up game. They completely deny the rim, and they're going to force the Maryland shooters to beat them over the top. And Maryland does have better shooters than they've had in the past, but they're not world beaters by any means. And Nebraska, they profile as a team that's much better as a dog. It's more of a defensive identity. And this Maryland team, they're showing cracks on both sides of the ball. This front line of Maryland hasn't been the greatest defensively. Derek Queen doesn't bring the defensive energy that's necessary to be an elite anchor of a defense, an elite rim protector. So they've been since conference play started, they've been slumping a little bit. So definitely want to back the Nebraska side, and Nebraska's coming off a home loss as well. So I do think they're going to be hungry in this game, and they've always profiled pretty well as an underdog. So I'll take them 7.5. I think there's a chance we get a slightly bigger number here, but I would back this down to 7.5. And that's the only play that I have on Sunday as of now. I haven't dove into the card all that much yet. So stay tuned for that. Most likely we'll either have an article or be releasing that play on Discord as well. And that'll be the last play of the day. So, thank you for tuning in. And like I said, stay tuned for these plays to be officially made as we don't know the actual lines, but I try my best to throw out the line that I would play it to, but we need to make sure those are official. The number means everything, as I'm going to keep harping on all season long. And you can find those on the Twitter and Discord. Discord link is in the Instagram and Twitter bios. And like I said, we're going to have an extra podcast day now. So hopefully doing this 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But on those days that we don't have podcasts, we're going to hopefully have a best bet article every single day that we don't have it. Maybe a few days in there that we won't have them and we'll release plays. But for the most part, we're going to try to get articles out on Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday for you guys. So yeah, and that'll be it. And good luck on your wagers. And we'll see you next time for a general podcast episode, just talking about the landscape of college basketball. That'll be coming up, being recorded on Sunday night, being released Monday morning. And yeah, good luck on your wagers, and we'll see you next time.